Hello, and welcome to DevOps Quick Bites, your friendly guide to all things Salesforce DevOps with me, Rob Cowell. So whether you're starting to solve tricky bugs or optimizing performance or chasing down those elusive errors, debug logs are the unsung heroes of Salesforce troubleshooting. In today's episode, I want to show you how to decode them like a pro and introduce you to a game-changing tool, the Apex Log Analyzer plugin for VS Code. So if that sounds good to you, stick around. Debug logs track everything happening in your Salesforce org during a transaction, whether it's Apex code execution or database queries or those automated flows. The logs are your ultimate source of truth. They're essential for diagnosing errors, spotting code exceptions or flow issues, optimizing performance, identifying slow SQL queries or heavy DML operations, and tracking permissions issues, debugging why a user might be hitting some errors. The debug logs are a Swiss Army knife for Salesforce admins and developers, but they can be a bit daunting to navigate, and that's why tools like the Apex Log Analyzer can be a game changer. So first, let's make sure that you can actually capture the debug logs. In Setup, search for Debug Logs. Click New Trace Flag and assign it to the user or the class that you're debugging. And customize the debug levels. Start with Fine for categories like Apex code, database, and validation rules. Remember that setting the debug level is crucial. If you've got too little detail, you'll miss critical info. If you've got too much, you might drown in the noise of output. So try and strike a bit of a balance here. Now that you're capturing debug logs, let me show you how to turn that chaos into clarity with the Apex Log Analyzer plugin. This free tool by Satinia takes raw debug logs and presents them in a clean visual format. You'll wonder how you ever debugged without it. Let's have a look at some of the key features. So let's look at an example log file, which I've loaded into the Apex Log Analyzer, which is plugged into VS Code. Here you can see a visual representation on the timeline of the various elements that make up a transaction. From left to right we can see the duration, and then rising up we can see the different elements as it goes through each of those phases. So let's start breaking some of those down. Here we can see when we started the execution, the overall timeline. And not dissimilar to that is when it starts executing the code. And as we rise up, generally these bars will get thinner as we get to the individual elements. We can see there we've started a DML operation and we are inserting some accounts. As we do that, various operations will fire. So here we can see we have the dynamic lookup rollup system in the org that I'm testing with here, or the LoRa's as many people call it. And you can see that it's got a roll up on the trigger for the account object, so it's executing that piece of code. And we can see there it's going into that code. We can see here, for example, is executing a SQL query. So we can really get a nice breakdown of all the elements that happen through that transaction. We can zoom in on various elements here to get a more detailed view. But that's generally the nice visual overview. Now, moving across to the next tab, we have the call tree. And we can see the various hierarchical things that are called as this transaction is executed. In this particular example here, you can see I also have a Nebula Logger plugin in this org. And this is the code tree of it calling into that. So it calls this, which calls that, which calls that, and so forth with the indenting. Helpfully, we can also see some things like how many SQL queries it runs there. We can see how long things take, how many rows are returned. Lots of really useful information for debugging on the log file. Moving to the next tab, Analysis. And again, we can group things by different types to make things a little easier. I've expanded out when code units have started, so we can see when individual methods or triggers have been activated as part of this transaction. And again, we can see how much time. So it allows us to kind of slice and dice the data, and we can see for each transaction what's taking the most time. So if we've got something that's taking a long time, we can really zero in on where the majority of that time is being taken. And then finally, we have the database tab.
which, as you can expect, is showing you the database operations. Here we can see the DML operations. So we've got our accounts being inserted and our contacts being inserted, and also some log files being inserted because of that logger plugin I have on here. But we can also see in the bottom part the actual individual SOC call statements that are being issued. So there's a couple of useful things that we can derive from that. We can see, are we hitting SOC call limits? Are we hitting SOC call timeouts? Are we hitting too many rows? But also what objects are being hit, how many rows are being returned, and again, like this nice big chunky one here, how long that is taking. So these are some of the sort of key statistics that we can get from that log analyzer. Now that you've seen the tool, let's talk about what to watch out for. Firstly, SOC call limits. Check the log for SOC call execute counts exceeding the limits. Batch queries to reduce the overhead. Long-running scripts. If your log shows CPU time limits being hit, then investigate loops or recursion. Look for uncommitted work. Ensure that the DML operations don't mix with callouts in a single transaction. So as you've seen, debugging doesn't have to be painful. Tools like the Apex Log Analyzer make it faster and more visual, but don't forget the basics of reading those raw logs sometimes. They're still your foundation. Now, if you found this episode helpful, do try out the Apex Log Analyzer for yourself. I'll drop a link to that plugin in the description. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your favourite debugging tips in the comments. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next DevOps Quick Bites. Bye for now.